So, we are going to talk a little bit about lab work today.
Yes, I'm so excited because labs are such a confusing, almost frustrating part of dealing with an illness that everyone goes through.
Absolutely. And they're also so confusing. Like everything that you can find is on the internet, especially, is so different. Everything says everything a little bit differently.
Yes, sorry, I got to turn my volume up a little bit.
No
I
problem.
know. So, where do you want to dive in? The thyroid panel or?
Yeah, let's start with thyroid.
Okay, yeah, because I think the majority, I mean, 20% of Americans have a thyroid issue. So this is like a huge one.
Yes.
Um, okay, so I maybe we should tell a little bit about ourselves really fast because I think some
Wonderful.
of your followers are on that have never seen me before.
Absolutely.
Cool. So Ashley and I know each other from our amazing school where we both graduated. It's called the Institute of Transformational Nutrition. And we are both certified transformational nutrition coaches. She specializes, as you guys probably know, in celiac, correct, and gluten.
Yep.
And I specialize with thyroid illnesses, hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's, and hyperthyroidism, since they are all under the same umbrella. And I myself was diagnosed with hypo and Hashimoto's, and I've been through it all, you guys. There is nothing that you can say to me or ask me that I have not experienced on a personal level. And but now I have managed to reverse the majority of my symptoms, and I've come out the other side. And now that's why I've decided to be a coach so that I can help others through it. Same thing for Ashley. She's been through
Absolutely.
hell and back with her health too. So that's we're both warriors in our own fields, and so we're here for you guys. So I can tell you that there was a day where I sat in front of my doctor, and they would say the words TSH, free T3, free T4, and all of these alien foreign words that I had no idea what they meant. And so I educated myself over the years. So um, a thyroid panel is what the doctors call a group of tests that they want to perform to see how your thyroid is functioning. So there's what, one, two, three, four tests within this panel. And do you want to explain what they are?
Absolutely. So first to flag, there are a lot of doctors who only will test your TSH and not run the full panel. A huge number of doctors that will do that, which doesn't give you the full picture. It's so important that you test the individual hormone levels. So usually this panel will involve the TSH, which is the thyroid stimulating hormone. And that's the one that really gets out of whack when you don't have the proper levels of the other hormones. It'll also test the total T4, which doesn't give you a full picture because that also includes some of the T4 that your body can't use,
Mm-hmm.
as well as you want to look at the free T4 and the free T3, which are the levels of these two hormones that are actually circulating in the body that your body can utilize.
Right. And I agree with her. A doctor that only decides to test your TSH is doing you a disservice
Mm-hmm.
because it's not giving the full picture of what's happening. And so I started learning at my doctor's appointments. I had to specifically ask them when they said, oh, let's do a thyroid panel. I would say, what tests do you include in that? And they would name them off to me. And if I noticed that they were leaving one of those out, I would simply say, can we please include the free T4 or the free T3, and they would always be like, okay, sure. Um, so, like Ashlee said, the reason why the free T4 and the free T3 are important is because those are the ones that are circulating throughout your bloodstream that your body can actually use.
Exactly.
Right. They are not bound to a protein so that they are more consumptionable. Is that a good word?
I think that makes sense.
Yeah. And then the total T4 is a snapshot of what all of your T4 is doing. The ones that are unbound to a protein and the ones that are bound. And so if you need to write those down for the next time you go to the doctor's appointment, do it so you don't forget, because it's really helpful. So
Absolutely.
let's
And
go in. Oh,
I was going to
sorry.
say, and the levels of your T3 and T4 can be thrown off before your TSHs. So that's why it's so important to have all of the tests involved. It gives you a much fuller picture.
Exactly. Yeah, you're trying to balance all of them within range, not just your TSH. It's important to have a complete balance.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this is perfect to go into the TSH and how and the confusion around the TSH range.
Exactly. Well, I think one of the things that's so important, um, I found, is when you actually physically do the test, because your TSH peaks in the morning, so that's the highest that it's ever going to be, and then it drops throughout the day to get lower, like your circadian rhythm. So if you're
Exactly.
testing at the end of the day, your levels are actually going to be lower than what your peak levels would be. So you could have a problem, but it could drop into range by the end of the day and you're not noticing that.
Exactly. Yes. So that's why it's important, you guys, to test first thing in the morning, but do not take your thyroid medication prior to going to test, because then
Absolutely.
when you take your medication, it's going to digest and absorb into your bloodstream, and then they're going to go pull your blood and they're going to test that. So that could also cause your TSH to look balanced when maybe really it's not. It's
Hmm.
just had an influx of medication into your system, and so that it gives it false numbers, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the one thing that I hear a lot of women suffering with is their doctor saying to them, "Your numbers are in range,
Hmm.
so you're fine." No, I'm not going to medicate you. You're in range. And they just want to like scream because it's like, but I don't feel good. What do you mean you're not going to medicate me? Or what do you mean I'm okay? And
Exactly.
and so there is a reason for this. They call this subclinical hypothyroidism. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Sure, absolutely. And part of why you can see this is that you can start having symptoms before your lab work really reflects it. Because once your lab work is reflecting it, like you obviously have a problem. It's been going on for a while. So there's a period where your labs are technically falling in the normal, but also the normal is made up by finding a range by taking tons of people's blood tests and being like, okay, most people fall in this range. This is a healthy range. But actually, especially in the United States, there's so many people who are ill. It's something like 45% of Americans have a chronic illness.
Mm-hmm.
So this range is probably also getting a lot of sick people in it. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not necessarily reflective of a range of healthy people. So
Right.
that can also be like top of the range, could be just because the whole range is getting pulled up from people who are having thyroid problems, but it looks to them like, okay, it's still in range, but that doesn't mean that it's optimal.
Exactly. And so a typical TSH range is a point, well, I've seen on my labs a 0.4 or a 0.5, all the way up to a 4.5. So
Yeah.
that's a humongous range. It's like this big. And I know personally, when I was in range and my numbers were at like a 2.7, I felt awful, but
Yeah.
I was in range. And so one of the things that I had to do as a patient was advocate for myself to my doctor and say, look, I understand that this is in range, but I don't feel good. And
Absolutely.
I would watch my labs every time they were pulled, every few months. And I started learning my personal pattern for when I was in a particular range of the test results, I felt good or I didn't.
Hmm.
And I noticed that when I was at the lower side of the range, almost to the lowest, pretty much like a 0.5,
Hmm.
when my energy levels were kicking ass, I wasn't having clumps of hair fall out. I could keep up with life and I felt normal. That's how I would describe it. Oh, I felt pretty normal, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think, so that is a really important factor that I want to put out to people is they really got to be strong if they need it and stand up for themselves and say, but I don't feel good. You know,
Exactly.
so what are my options? And if you have a doctor that's just not willing to help you, um, then you may have to switch. I know I did a
Yeah.
few times.
Um,
Um,
I've actually read that over 2.5, a lot of functional doctors consider that to be subclinical
yeah,
because that's usually where they start seeing symptoms.
yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. So, you know, I honestly wish that the ranges would be shortened, they would be smaller. I
Hmm.
feel like a lot of people would get more help and they would get taken more seriously. But hey, that's why we're here to educate everyone.
Exactly.
um, so that pretty much covers the thyroid channel, but we could go into the antibodies, which is also a really important
Absolutely.
part of thyroid testing.
Wonderful. Yeah. Do you want to start with talking about the antibodies?
Oh, antibodies. I went through this game with my antibodies, my TPO antibodies.
Hmm.
Um, I remember thinking, okay, if I can just get my antibodies down to this optimal range of under 100, then I'm going to feel like magic, right? And so I talked my doctor into putting me on naltrexone, low
Okay.
dose, low dose naltrexone, because it helps suppress the antibodies.
Hmm.
And I was reading a lot of really good research on it, and I was like, "Ooh, this
Yeah.
sounds
I've
fun,"
read
you
some
know?
very interesting things about it.
Yeah. So I took it for a year, and it didn't make a difference.
Oh,
And I know I
that's
was
such a
all like,
bummer.
"Ooh," I was thinking it was like a wonder pill. And I was paying like $50 a month for it too. So you live and learn.
Yeah.
Um, so my antibodies was kind of like this game that I was trying to play where I could like beat it. But what I basically learned was the inflammation that was happening. Um, it wasn't, the naltrexone couldn't control it because ultimately I had things I needed to heal. But the indicator that I appreciated for myself with antibodies was that my immune system was doing its job, first of all, and it was helping me. But a lot of people use antibodies as an inflammation marker in order to know how serious their symptoms are.
Hmm.
Um, I'll let you elaborate on that.
Um, well, especially like for celiac, that's most of what they test as antibodies because usually the more antibodies you have, the more your body is reacting to something. So that's why, for example, for all the celiac tests, they recommend that you be eating gluten, because if you stop eating it before the blood test, it's much more likely that you're going to have a false negative, because your immune system's going to calm down and you're not going to see those elevated antibodies on the test. So that's one of the ways that they use a kind of a marker, because if it's a higher level, there's more stuff going on with your immune system.
Got it. Got it. So tell me more about the eating gluten and eating bread in the test, because
Yeah.
that's not something people with thyroid issues have to go through. So let's hear
Yeah.
more about that.
So, in order to do the blood testing for celiac, which a lot of times your doctor will run a TTIGA, which is a tissue transglutaminase IgA test. I'm like, I know there's so many syllables in that.
Yeah,
Um,
you did good.
Thank you. And so that's really the most sensitive test that they do for testing for celiac, because um, the TTIGA test shows you if your body is producing antibodies that are attacking enzymes in the intestines, which is what happens when you have celiac disease.
Okay.
So they'll test that, and then they'll also usually test for an IgA deficiency by doing total serum IgA, because it's more likely to have an IgA deficiency when you have celiac. So if they don't test that as well, you might not be creating it, but still have your body be attacking your intestines. So they have to do, there's a bunch of different antibody tests that they usually do in a celiac panel.
Okay.
And the reason that you have to be, eating gluten is because since the celiac autoimmune response is so related to consuming gluten, if you cut it out before the test, your body will start healing, which drops your antibodies levels down. Like for me, last time I had a celiac panel done, my antibodies looked like any normal person because I've been gluten free for so long. Um,
Awesome.
but thank you. I was like, yay, I did it.
Yeah, congrats.
Thank you.
So hang on. I
Yeah.
heard you say that there's a celiac panel.
Yes.
Okay, so in that panel, there's two particular tests you're saying that are the most common. And
Yeah. So it's the TTG IgA.
okay,
And then they usually test total serum IgA to make sure you don't have a deficiency, because celiac can cause a deficiency, and then you would test negative for the TTG IgA
oh
because of the
wow,
deficiency. They
interesting.
also have an EMA IgA test, which is very, very specific to celiac disease. Actually, much more specific than the TTG IgA, but it's a lot more expensive. So sometimes doctors won't run that unless they're having a hard time finding a diagnosis. And then if you are IgA deficient, they'll also look at your DGP, IgA, and IgG, which are other
Yeah,
antibodies that can further show celiac disease.
yeah, it all makes sense. They're all antibodies. They're all immune reaction tests that
Exactly.
yeah show the reaction. What did I just say?
Yeah.
Okay, well that's good to know. Yeah, because I've never I cut out gluten so long ago that it's just not something I had to worry about, because that's when you have a thyroid, the first two foods you want to cut out when you have a thyroid illness is dairy and gluten. Just
Hmm.
period in the story. Those two foods cause so many symptoms and
Absolutely.
make symptoms so much worse that you need to do yourself a favor and eliminate those two foods right off the bat. And I know like you'll show improvement, as
Yeah.
well, like how much better you feel off of those. I call them trigger foods. They're trigger
Yeah.
foods.
So the
um,
hard thing is, though, with these tests, if you've already cut out gluten but you want to do celiac testing, your doctors will make you do what's called a gluten challenge,
okay.
which if you don't have to do it, I don't suggest doing it. I
Oh
think
my
it's the
gosh, what is that?
equivalent of like having to eat 5 pieces of gluten-full bread per day, because what you want to happen is you want to spike those antibodies up if you're reacting to it so that they'll see it on the test. So that's why I always suggest to clients, everyone, I feel like that has experience with celiac always is like, do not go gluten-free before you do the test, because either you're going to have results that might not be correct, or you're going to have to do a gluten challenge and it's not going to be fun.
Wow, that doesn't sound fun. So let me ask you this. You said if people want to get tested for celiac, but after they have gone gluten free, what would be some telltale symptoms that they have if they already are eating gluten free, but have a suspicion that it may be more like and want to get tested for celiac?
Yeah, it might be vitamin deficiencies.
Mm.
Like B12 is a big one. The damage that's caused in the small intestines with celiac causes your B12 levels to drop really low, usually, because that's where your body absorbs B12. So if you're having vitamin deficiencies like that, sometimes it's like if you're still having GI problems, because it can take a little bit to heal. So sometimes that will, you know, cause you to want to test for something else. Sometimes it's other things like you can have like a SIBO flare up, which is small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, which is where the bacteria from the large intestine makes its way up to the small intestines, which can cause very similar symptoms to celiac or Crohn's or colitis. So sometimes they'll want to do a testing if that happens, because those GI disorders can make you more prone to having SIBO.
Yes, that is true. Yeah. Okay, well, that's good to know. I
And
love that you brought up the B12 deficiency. Um, I was just having this conversation on a discovery call the other day. A lot of people don't realize that they can ask their doctor for vitamin tests, and they can
mm-hmm,
actually request to have their B's and their D's checked, or their magnesium or what it is, something that's a concern, so that you have a baseline of where you're at, so that when you do start supplementing, you know the right milligrams to go for.
exactly.
Yeah,
Uh,
because B12 is a common deficiency in my clientele as well
mhm.
as your clientele.
Yep, I find B12 and D are usually the ones that people have the hardest time with.
Yes, definitely the B12, and it's also because they're taking the wrong kind of B12.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you're
Yes.
not taking a methylated B12, your body is going to probably have a harder time absorbing it, especially since there's so many people that have, I always forget what letters are in it. It's like I always in my mind call it the mother gene mutation, because it's like the MTHR.
MTHFR,
Yes, I was
MTHFR.
like, I know
Yeah,
there's a letter that I'm missing in there.
yeah.
But in my mind, I
It looks
always
like
read it as
mother.
the
Yeah,
mother.
mother effort one.
Um,
Yeah.
but if you have that mutation, which many people do, your body is not going to be able to absorb the other forms of B12 as well. And
Yes. So
also folate as well.
correct. I did do that gene testing as well, and I was mutated on my MTHFR.
Me too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I was having my doctor pull my B's, and I was taking the wrong kind of B, and my results were like 1,500 when you're not supposed to go over, I think, like maybe 200. Don't quote me on that. And my doctor goes, "Can you bring me your actual supplement bottle that you're taking, please? Because your levels are like way too high, and it's not normal for it to be this way." And so, sure enough, I like sent him a picture on email or something, and he was like, "Oh yeah, that is the wrong kind of bee. It's just like flooding your system, but you're not like really actually using it. So you're still
Hmm.
deficient, but your levels are like insanely high. I'm like,
So
wow, how does that work?
you were just peeing it out.
Pee, pumping myself full and peeing it out, and
Yeah.
so there goes that money. And I'm like, and so he said, yeah, I can't ever say the full word, methylate, methyl
Methylated.
something. Yeah, so I just knew
Yeah.
that it says meth. It'll say B12, and then in parentheses, it'll say this really long M word. I'm like, okay, it starts with a meth.
Methococobalamin or something like that. I can never say it.
Yeah, that one. But at my local health food store, I found a really good complex where it has all the Bs, the whole B spectrum, not just the B12, but it has the proper B12 because we really need the full B spectrum. 12 is the
Yeah,
most important, but I don't want to steer people to only take 12. You need the full spectrum.
exactly.
Yeah. So I use a complex. And so that's a little tip right there. But the D is huge too. Right now with
Yes.
everyone hiding in their house, I mean, can you imagine the deficiency in D that is going on?
Oh, yeah. Well, especially since most people in the Northern Hemisphere have lower D levels in general.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's so important. I've always been told by doctors that if you have something autoimmune going on, you don't want to just be in the range for D. You want to be in at least the top half of the range, if not the top quarter, because it's so important to our immune systems. And it's similar to that whole thing that we were talking about. There's so many people who are really low in vitamin D that they're basing this range off of. So you really want to be towards the top in order
Yeah,
to function optimally.
right. And so I was just looking through my labs. I'm like, what is the range? I forgot. So the range is the low end is 30 and the high end is 100.
Yeah.
So in order to get to the top half of the range, you got to be taking a pretty big vitamin D. Um, and a straight vitamin D isn't usable. You
No.
need to be using like a D3 or
Yeah.
a D3 with K.
I always use a D3 with K2 because I find that that
Yeah.
works the best for me personally. And I just get the liquid drops, and it's like a couple drops, 5 drops on your tongue, and you're good to go.
Right, right. So how many how many IUs is one of your drops? 1,000?
I believe so, yes. I haven't, I've been
Right.
taking the same one for so long that I don't even remember.
Right. Yeah. So when I was below the 30, like I've been in the 15s and 20s
I think my
since,
lowest was 22.
yeah, so I've always been deficient in my D's, and in order for me to get my D's up just mid-range to a 50, I was taking 10,000 IUs a day,
Oh, wow.
or two 5,000 IUs, two pills basically.
Hmm.
And so just to give everyone an indication of like how much it takes, but it sounds like a lot, but in the D world, it's not a lot. Like
Yeah.
people that are super super, like I could easily, if I went and tested tomorrow and I was still at a 50 and I wanted to get up into like the 80s or 70s,
Hmm.
80s, 90s, I could easily jump up to a 20,000 IU supplement a day and
Yeah,
still be in range and be okay.
exactly.
So yeah, like the D's, they just sound a little scarier because the numbers are so large.
Yeah.
Um,
Numbers like that with any other supplement, you'd be like, what?
yeah, you would go in toxic shock, so don't do that.
Yes.
So, right. Um,
Awesome. I
so,
also wanted to add about the celiac testing. I completely forgot to add it before. Another lab that they usually do is a genetic test
oh,
because for celiac, they look for the HLA DQ2 and HLA DQ8 genes, which make it so that you're more likely, well, they're part of the celiac profile because celiac is genetic as well.
mhm.
But just having the genes doesn't mean that you have celiac. I think it's 25 to 30% of people have one of these two genes or both. And only 1% of the population test positive for celiac. But it does make it so that you're more likely because those are genes that are associated with celiac.
Okay. Yeah, and I can actually agree with that. When I did my 23andMe testing, it did come back and say that I'm more susceptible because of my genes to having celiac. And so, because of those results, I actually went and got tested. But they now, after everything you're teaching me, I don't think I was tested right because I never had to do a gluten challenge. I never had to eat 5 things of bread. I don't eat gluten free for like, I don't know, 8 years or something. And so all of my results came back negative. And now, based on what you've taught me, it's like, well, of course they did.
Yeah.
So,
But at this point, it's like if you're going to be gluten free anyway for the thyroid,
yeah.
you're going to be gluten free anyway.
Yeah.
So
So
it's
I'm
definitely not
good.
worth it at this point.
Yeah, I don't need to put myself through that for sure.
But like for
I
example, I have the gene, and it runs on my mom's side of the family. So my mom has the gene, but she doesn't have celiac. My grandfather has the gene because it's his family. That's the one, like all my grandfather's siblings have celiac except for him.
okay.
So he has the gene as well, but doesn't have active celiac. And then his siblings, some of their kids have it, some of their kids don't, some of their grandkids have it, some of their
Huh.
grandkids don't.
Interesting.
So it's kind of like almost luck of the draw in my family, how my line doesn't have it except for me. But then that other part of the family, tons of people have celiac.
Interesting. Huh. Well, that is good to know. So, one day when you have children, you're gonna have to keep an eye out on for that with them
Yeah,
for sure, since it's so prominent.
exactly. And they usually recommend that if someone tests positive for celiac, that their first degree relatives also get tested because it they find that there are a lot of people that have like silent celiac. So
Hmm.
they may be causing damage, but not having symptoms.
Wow, silent celiac. That's a new one. Ay
Yeah.
ay ay. That doesn't sound fun. Um, I was just looking through my notes of everything that I wanted to point out, and I think we've already covered everything.
Whoa, wonderful.
I know. The the last thing that I wanted to point out, by the way, all those people saying hi are my family. My whole
I've
family's watching right now. Hey, you
I've been
guys.
hitting the wave button to all of them. So hello everyone.
They were totally distracting me, but thanks for the support, you guys. I love you too. Um, so the last thing I wanted to point out was I wanted to let everyone know that Ashlee and I, as you can see, we know a lot about this stuff. She is clearly extremely educated when it comes to celiac and gluten issues, which is a huge problem going on in our nation. And if you didn't already see our other video on how to go transition into eating gluten-free, I highly suggest you go check that out. It was awesome.
Yeah,
We killed it.
that
There's
was a
so
great one. I loved that one.
yeah, that was awesome. I love doing videos with you.
Love doing videos with you too. It's so much fun.
Thank you. Um, but we're both open to accepting discovery calls if anyone wants to get in touch with either of us more. Um, I offer a 60-minute discovery call. Is your 60 minutes as well?
I usually do 30 minutes, but to be honest, it usually runs over. So at least 30 minutes.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So if anyone is interested in learning more or getting support from what they're going through, please reach out to us. Like I was saying at the beginning of the video, we both have been through it and we're on the other side. And that's why we decided to become coaches so that we can turn around and give back and help you guys. And we know that there's so much confusion and misinformation And as a coach, we can help translate what all of that is, and how to help guide you through this insanity.
Absolutely. We've been through it. Learn from our mistakes.
Please, yes, learn from us and don't go through it, because we can guide you and help you, and we want to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So where can they hook up with you? What's your website?
So my website is chronicwellnessnutrition.com. You can also always send me a DM on Instagram. I'm also Chronic Wellness Nutrition on Facebook. So yeah, there's tons of way to reach me. So whatever is easiest for you guys.
Yeah, exactly. Same with me. I'm coachsharejoy.com. And I actually have a private Facebook group if anyone's interested in. It's called Coach Sarah Joy's Thyroid Sisterhood. I am building my sisterhood community. I already have some amazing women as my members, and I love it. I go live in there and I do special lessons specifically for thyroid illness. If you guys are interested in joining that, I would love to have you. Um,
Wonderful.
so, yeah. Well, I'm going to wrap it up at this time, Ashlee. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Of course. Thank you for joining me today.
Yes. And I will talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Now I will try to figure out how to save this video.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course. Thanks.
All right. Bye.
Bye.